So yeah, looks like we're recording it. So, okay, let's get started. So yeah, today we are going to cover 3 big buckets of information. Our objectives with this webinar is to 1, understand the legislative branch of government, 2, understand what is the state legislative process, and 3, how to effectively advocate for issues important to you throughout the legislative process. That's a lot, I know, but I promise you, we're going to talk through all of it. Okay, there we go. So let's get to know PWN first. I saw before we started, or I shared my screen, a lot of familiar faces. We have a lot of PWN members, leaders, allies with us today, and I'm so great to see you all. But for those of you who might be unfamiliar with who PWN is, I wanted to take some time to talk about us. So PWN is the only national organization in the US led by and for women and people of transgender experience living with HIV. We were founded in 2008, wow, 12 years, by 28 diverse women living with HIV, including women of trans experience. Today we have 3,000 members nationwide. I know some of them are on this webinar. We have chapters in Colorado, Louisiana, New York, Texas, South Carolina, Alabama, we have them all over. And we have state leads in another 12 states, including a state lead here in my state of Virginia. Just so proud of the work you all do. So our mission at PWN is to prepare and involve women living with HIV in all of our diversity, including gender identity and sexual orientation, in all levels of policy and decision-making. And yes, that means state leg policy and decision making as well. So, when we talk about state legislative advocacy, I'm going to break down what that is, what it can look like. But why does PWN care so much about state leg and influencing policy? Well, a lot of reasons. And we've developed a policy agenda that you can find on our website. But our policy agenda is composed of 6 main issues. 1 is universal health care. The other is economic justice, sexual and reproductive health rights and justice, ending criminalization, trans rights, safety and justice, and ending violence against women living with HIV. These are very broad policy issue areas that we see pop up time and time again at every level of government, right? We see it at the federal level, we see it at the state level, and we see it at the local level. PWN recognizes that people living with HIV, issues impacting our community's well-being and life show up in more ways than I think is traditionally discussed, right? Like how we form our families, access to healthcare that is truly comprehensive and inclusive, ending HIV criminalization, and ensuring that our trans siblings are safe. These are all things that also impact people living with HIV. And so PWN drafted this policy agenda, through a racial, gender, and economic justice lens to ensure that the fullness and the intersectionality of people living with HIV is recognized and worked for at every level of government. I'm just so proud of it. All right, so this is going to be an interactive webinar because there's so many webinars going on. I love it when we are actually engaging with one another and rather than just me talking at my computer. So I want to start with a poll. I want to get a sense of where folks are at with state leg. So I'm about to launch a poll. What will happen is that you'll get a little box pop up and there will be 3 to 4 options. You can choose one of them. This is just to get a sense of where we're at with state leg. So I'm about to launch the poll now. The question is, do you have any previous experience with state legislative advocacy? Please choose which one. Okay, I see them coming in. Oh, wow. Okay. Oh, okay, we almost got all of them. And if you're calling in on your phone, you may not be able to see the poll. I'm unsure. So sorry if you're not seeing it, if you've called in via phone. All right, we got 38 of 48 participants who have voted. I'll give you all 20 more seconds to vote. right. Anyone else? I see a couple folks that could still take it. That's okay though, no worries. All right, I'm gonna end the poll. So this is what we got. A really great mix of folks, right? So 14 of the 41 who voted say, I'm new, but I'm excited to learn more about it and start. Awesome. We have 22 folks out of 41 who said, you got some experience, right? That's great. And then 5 are just state legislative advocacy stars. Great. I would love to hear more from y'all throughout the poll, but thanks. This is really helpful in how we cover our topic today. Okay, I think I just shared them. Here are the poll results for y'all to see. Awesome. So I wanted to start with, why are we again so invested in state legislative advocacy? Well, I pulled together a couple of headlines throughout the years that touch that I think demonstrate how our issues that impact us show up at the state legislative level, right? So we know, like, just this past year in Virginia, the Virginia State Legislature passed a fully comprehensive and inclusive LGBTQ non-discrimination bill, right? It is the first Southern state to do so. That was entirely done by the work of state and local advocates. We are having difficulty getting something like that done at the federal level, right? So I think it's important that we look at our state legislatures, because at the state and local level is where we can enact legislation. So that's pass bills, create new policies that have a direct impact on our day-to-day lives. Other examples I wanted to bring up was most recently, in Louisiana. Luckily, this bill failed, but during Louisiana special session, just this past couple months, a bill was introduced to penalize defunding local police. So what that was going to look like is that if a city decided to roll back funding for police and maybe redistribute that funding to like community services and programs, that city would get slapped with some sort of fine for doing that, right? Like that, like in our minds, I'm sure a lot of us are thinking, why would you penalize somebody from wanting to invest in community? Well, some folks disagree with that method. And so we saw a bill introduced at the state level that would try to prohibit that from happening. We also know, like a lot of us that are familiar and work in HIV criminalization within our states, that is a form of state legislative advocacy. And, one form of HIV criminalization efforts, starting from a bill and becoming law is in California, where we saw, the state pass and the governor sign into law a bill that modernized HIV crime or modernized the HIV criminalization statute in that state. So these are just a couple examples. There's also one from Colorado. HIV prevention meds will soon be available without a prescription. All these are just great examples of why state legislative advocacy matters. We can impact things we can influence issues that impact our communities right in our own home. So, there's that whole like, well, we can have real effective change, I think, argument of like why we want to do state legislative advocacy. But another reason why can be just like a bit more practical, right? So state legislative advocacy is not as polarizing as local and federal governing bodies. I think we're very familiar with how gridlocked our federal Congress has been for quite some time. It's pretty near impossible to get any sort of legislation through at the federal level. Meanwhile, a lot of us have needs and we have concerns with things that are happening in our communities, and we want to see our representatives in state legislatures like do something about it, respond to it. And so focusing our efforts at the state level is one way that we can enact change that maybe we're not able to see due to the polarization at the local and federal level. Again, engaging in state legislative advocacy has a profound impact on the welfare of our communities, right? Like state legislatures decide funding, right? Like what programs and services get funding. And it also, again, is legislation, bills that impact our day-to-day life. So what can legislative advocacy do, right? Well, it can do a lot of things. You can change your state's existing laws. That's like, you may hear like reform, amend. You can change existing laws, right? They're not permanent. You can change them. You can pass new state laws. And you can also give your community a voice, right? Like sometimes our work doesn't always look like creating a new law or reforming an existing law. It can be just like, it can be a community mobilization and giving our community a voice so that when we go to our state legislators and we consistently engage with our state legislators, they know who we are, what our issues are, and maybe we'll see some sort of tangible outcome like a bill or a law in the near future. All right, so I wanted to give some examples of what are legislative issues. You know, I put down reproductive rights, I put down healthcare, I put down decriminalization of drug use, sex work, funding for programs and services, and I know there's so many more things that are legislative issues. And so here's the second interactive component of our webinar. Give me 1 second to switch my screen. Oh no, I think it was actually working. No, we'll just do it this way. No. All right, so I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with Poll Everywhere, but I'm about to activate this poll. And all you need to do is if you're on a computer, you can go to pollev.com and enter Brianna Diaz 703, or you can join by text on your cell phone by texting Brianna Diaz 703 to the number 22333. You're going to get a response. And all I'm asking is for you to write, and you can write as many times as you want, like what issues would you like to see addressed in your next legislative session, right? And it's going to create an awesome word cloud. So I am launching this now. I'm going to go full screen. So either text to join this interactive portion, or you can join by computer. And you can type, once you've joined, type in what issue you would like to see addressed in your state's next legislative session, right? It can be reproductive rights, healthcare, abortion, defunding police. Let's see if we've got any. Okay, we got insurance. Yep. Awesome. And as word clouds do, the more one word is used, the larger that word will get. Again, you can put in as many responses as you want. Yes. Oh, wow. Awesome. So we see we want a stimulus, we want fair pay, we want rights, we want voting rights. What is this? Is it loan infrastructure, budget, decriminalization, environment, a student loan forgiveness. Awesome. So this is a very, very broad range of issues, all of which, every single issue identified so far and that keep being added, you can address in your state's next legislative session. Yes, awesome. All right, I'm going to exit out of this, but thank you so much for providing what issues you want to see and just participating in this word cloud. I'm new to the word cloud. I really enjoyed it. All right, I will switch back. So we went through a lot of issues, right? And you know, thank you so much for identifying what you want to see. I hope you know, going through what legislative advocacy is very briefly, started to give you some ideas, right, of like these issues you identified, how you can be an advocate on behalf of them. And so a lot of folks say, you know, I know the issues I care about. I know I'm an advocate, but Brianna, like, what is this legislative branch? Like, it's so confusing. Like it meets at random times. Like when can I actually intervene in the process of legislation? Like, how can I? Who is my representative? Great questions. I will answer all of them, I promise you. So we're going to start with the legislative branch. So the legislative branch, right? It's one of three branches of government that exist, at the state and federal level, right? But the legislative branch is the state's lawmaking body. It is typically composed of two legislative bodies, right? So there will be a state senate. We all have, our state senate. And then there's also the second body is the state House of Representatives. It can also be called like the House of Delegates here in Virginia. I don't have a House of Representatives. I have delegates and I have a state senate. But just know whether it's a representative or a delegate or even a general assembly, like it's all the same thing, right? It's just like it's a form of the legislative body. And the primary function of the legislative branch is to represent your constituents, right? As representation of constituents. It's also to create laws through the passage of bills, and it also establishes the budget, which is a very big deal, especially in some states like Texas. So yeah, I want to go through the levels of representation, right? So at the federal level, like I said, there's three branches of government. We're just talking about the legislative right now, but sometimes this helps people, like, I think, visualize like two of the branches. So at the executive level, at the state, we know the governor is the executive, right? That's the person who signs bills into law. We also know that at the federal level, there is the president. And then at the city level or municipal, it can be like a mayor, right? And so when it comes to the legislative branch, as I said, it's composed of two different legislative bodies. I have South Carolina as example, but this applies to any state. There's the higher legislative chamber. At the state level, that's just like the state Senate. At the federal level, that is the US Senate. And then the lower legislative chamber is always, the state House of Representatives or delegates. And at the federal level, it is the US House of Representatives, right? So the lower legislative chamber always has more people in there. It is considered the lower house. And then the higher chamber is the Senate. It usually has less, right? Like we all have like two senators, but we only have one representative, kind of that thing. So yeah, I just wanted to put that like as a visual aid, if that's helpful in understanding the two different legislative chambers and like how they intersect. All right, so the legislative process. I'm going to break down these concepts a little bit more. So don't worry, I might talk a lot, but I promise you there are slides for each one. So, we're going to go through the legislative process, which typically starts with a concept, right? We might think as advocates, as directly impacted community, as constituents, I'm having an issue with, something like accessing healthcare that is affirming of my gender identity and sexual orientation, right? Like I have this idea, I should not face discrimination when getting health insurance or healthcare. And so that concept is typically turned into a bill. Such a fun process writing a bill. And once you've written your bill, you have to find a sponsor, right? So bills are introduced in the House side or the Senate side, both, but they just have to be introduced by a legislator. Like I can write a bill and I can march it up to my like state capitol, when it's safe and be like, do the thing. Unfortunately, I am not I'm not a representative or a senator, so I cannot introduce the bill into the state legislature, right? I have to have a member of Congress do that. So that's why you need to get a sponsor. That's when you start doing outreach, right? So I have my bill. I'm saying I want non-discrimination in healthcare. I got my bill sponsor on board, and then we introduce it. Once you introduce a bill, it goes to a specific committee. And we're going to break down committees quite a bit because that is where a lot of our state legislative advocacy will happen. Once a bill has gone to a committee votes on it, and then the committee sends it to the floor. The floor is a term for just the entirety of a legislative body, right? So when we say a bill was voted out of committee and went to the House floor, that means now like every member, like the whole House has it and they will be voting on it. It's just like a floor vote. That's another way. So once once a House has voted on it, once one body of the legislature has voted on a bill, let's say they passed it, it then has to go to the other body, the second legislative body to vote on it. And let's say both bodies, the Senate and the House, voted in favor of our bill. It then goes to the executive, which at the state level is our governor, and the governor may sign the bill into law. And then voila, it's a law. So that's a very general understanding of the legislative process, and I'm going to break that down a little bit more. So as I said, the legislative process, first we're going to start with concept and sponsor. So issues become concepts, which become bills, right? So I gave my healthcare non-discrimination one. So that's a universal thing, right? Like any issue you are seeing in your community, in your life, that is a concept. And like we can remedy that issue or address that issue via a bill. You then want to find a sponsor, or what we commonly refer as at PWN, we're looking for our legislative champion. That is a legislator who will introduce our bill and champion our bill throughout the entire process, throughout the entire legislative process. There can be more than one sponsor for a bill, and those additional sponsors are called co-sponsors. It's great to have more people sponsoring your bill, right? That means a lot of people support it. They want to get behind it. And that also helps show that this is an important issue. It signals to potential co-sponsors, maybe even opposition, that this is a widely supported concept. This is a widely supported bill, and we want action now. So always have a sponsor and always pursue co-sponsors. So you can become a co-sponsor after a bill is introduced, right? And this is just like a little minor detail, I think, where it's like, I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar that once a bill is introduced, or maybe prior to the bill's formal introduction, we want to get as many people signed on to the bill as possible, as many legislators signed on to the bill as possible. It's okay if you are like a legislator, your legislator missed the opportunity to become a co-sponsor before the bill is introduced. There is time to get them on board and co-sponsor your bill after it's been introduced. So just a little thing to throw out there. So I mentioned before, we were going to talk about the legislative process, committees, right? So committees examine policy issues and determine whether a bill will go to the floor for a full vote. Many bills die in committee. I'm sure a lot of folks are familiar with this who have done state legislative advocacy, right? Like we had our bill, we had our sponsors introduced, it got assigned to its respective committee, and then it never got a hearing. So it died. And that sucks, especially when it's a bill you really work for. So that's kind of why I wanted to point, like I think I said that, like, this is a very important process in the point in the legislative process is engaging with committees, because this is where your bill lives or dies. And this is where your bill can also be radically changed from what you originally intended. So most of the work to delay or pass a bill happens in committee, right? And this is also where you may provide testimony. We love testimony at PWN, and I know our members do too, who have done state legislative advocacy, right? So committees are in charge of overseeing the bill, right? Typically, when a bill is introduced to a committee, they will hold a hearing. That hearing is an opportunity for the public, for constituents, for organizations like Positive Women's Network and other organizations to show up and voice their opposition or support of a bill. Right? That's really important. We want to show the members of the committee and the larger legislature that this is important to us. You need to act on it. Testimony can be provided in person, like this, the example of this person in the picture standing at the podium. However, given COVID-19, I really want to emphasize that It may not be safe to do in-person testimony. There are virtual testimony options, and it's definitely something we at PWN are working to address to ensure our folks have access to their legislature. But you can, like, one form is oral or in-person testimony, but you can also do written. You can submit a letter. You can, for the public record. It's okay if you don't feel comfortable speaking in public. You can write why you support a bill, why you oppose a bill, and get it into the committee, and it's part of the official public record. So yes, again, committees are very, very important in the legislative process. This is where a lot of our fighting happens. All right, so let's say, the committee, we submit our testimony and we're like, Brianna, we love this healthcare non-discrimination bill. The committee's like, yes, we loved it. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you for your sign-on letter supporting it. They voted out, it goes to the floor. The floor is where the votes on a bill happen. Both the House and Senate must vote in favor of a bill before it can go to the governor. So this is the second bullet point, is where some of the fun begins with the legislature. So if the House and Senate bills are not identical, the bill cannot move forward to the governor until both chambers, that is the House and Senate, have voted on the exact same bill. And so I think what that looks like in practice is, like I said, let's say I introduced my non-discrimination bill on the House side, right? I had a delegate introduce it. It got to the committee, the House committee, was voted out. The House voted in favor of it. It then goes to the Senate, has to go through the entire same process. It goes to a Senate committee. And let's say in the Senate committee, somebody changed one word of my bill, one word. Let's say I said, you cannot discriminate on the basis of, LGBTQ status, right? And then someone changed it to you shall not. They changed can to shall. The bill is no longer identical. And let's say that bill gets voted out of committee as shall. My House version is can. My Senate version is shall. It gets to the Senate floor, it votes, and they're like, no, the bill is different because that one word. So then a whole other process starts. That could be conferencing. You might have heard that term, like we go to conference, or maybe the bill gets kicked back to the House to accept or reject that one word change. So it's a longer process, but I wanted to at least illustrate that, the bill has to be identical, right? Both chambers have to pass the exact same bill before it can go to the governor. So just be aware of, sometimes if you see, why did my bill pass here and made it to the Senate and now it's back in the House, what happened? There's probably a change made to your bill. So just be aware of that. That is another tactic used to sometimes kill bills. And then again, the final step, we made it through all that drama, is that the governor signs the bill into law. Hooray. So I wanted to share some information, right? Like we're talking about state legislative advocacy, we're talking about the legislative branch, but some folks are like, okay, but when is my state in session? When are they even in session? And so I created it, or not, I'm sharing this chart, and I'm going to share with you all in our email that goes out to folks that attended, but there is a phenomenal website with an interactive map that you can scroll over your state, and it will provide the dates your state is in session. And this is important to know, because each state has different dates that they convene, which means they start. They have different days that they adjourn, which means the session is over. And also for the length the session is, how many days that they're in session, varies state to state. I'm sure you can see that just with these couple examples I could include, because it is quite a long list. So, if you're wanting to do state legislative advocacy, my tip is to find out when your state is in session, so you've had enough time to prepare for the session, and you know when to engage, and you know the timeline for your engagement. Another thing is, it's okay if you don't know who your state representative and senator are. That is totally okay. I'm going to share with you a really great resource. I just took a snapshot of it to include here, but all you do is enter your home address. You click search by address, and it'll populate your excuse me, your state representatives and senators. Again, we will share this. I wanted to do a demo, but I want to be mindful of time. So we will share this with you all, I promise. All right, so legislative advocacy. So why should you be a legislative advocate? You know, a lot of reasons, right? First of all, y'all are the subject matter experts. Like, as people living with HIV, as a person providing services to people living with HIV, and as a community advocate, you know what is best for your community, period. Your lived experience provides perspective and impact for beyond what only data can provide, right? We hear a lot about how research is needed, data, prove a problem, but honestly, legislators or lawmakers, they need the human story and face to understand how laws and policies impact communities. And that's what being a legislative advocate is really about, is showing up and saying, this is an issue, here's how it's impacting me, and this is what you need to do to address it, representative or senator, whatever. So there's different types of advocacy, right? And I'm going to go over 4: direct outreach, coalitions, engaging with the legislative process, and developing tools. So first, direct outreach. We're going to share like how to find your state legislator, representative, and senator, if you don't already know who they are. And what you want to do is that you want to reach out to them, right? Develop a relationship with your legislator and other stakeholders. Other stakeholders can be other community-based groups that you work with. It can be your service provider. It can be like a CBO or ASO. It can be PWN. It can be a lot of different folks. You want to develop a relationship with all of them, just so you all can have like intel sharing, strategize on how to address a bill, right? You want to reach out to your legislator via email or in person when it's safe. Again, we are in COVID-19. Sometimes going to densely populated places isn't the best move right now. But you can email your legislator and you can call them on the phone. Right? They answer to you. You are the constituent. They work for you. So reach out to them and develop a relationship with them so they know that you are the expert and that you are someone that they can rely on and look to as legislation that impacts you and you care about moves through the legislature. Reach out to partner organizations, like I said, let them know what issues are important to you and what issues they should address. I'm sure folks that are on here right now that either work for like organizations that do legislative work know that we set our policy priorities before sessions meet, right? We know what bills to expect or we anticipate seeing, and we know which ones that we're gonna work on. It's okay if you don't have a lot of personal capacity to do like this level of advocacy and engagement that's so constant and rigorous and rapid. That is okay. Reach out to your partner orgs. If you all have the exact same policy priorities, right? Find ways to partner together and support each other's work. Coalitions. This is a great one to do. You can form or join a coalition, right? So coalitions can be issue specific. We can have coalitions on expanding Medicaid in states that didn't expand it. We can have coalitions on immigrant rights, safety, and justice. We can have coalitions on protecting access to abortion. There's a bunch, right? They're issue specific. You can definitely find or join a coalition in your community. And we want to ensure that any coalition that is working on issues impacting people living with HIV, and that is a lot of issues. Every single issue you all identified in that word cloud activity is an issue that impacts people living with HIV. And it is critical that coalitions have meaningful involvement of people living with HIV, right? Like, as directly impacted folk, as the subject matter experts, your leadership is integral to, I think, the success of any type of advocacy, right? And there's multiple ways you can be involved with a coalition. Again, capacity concerns. You can be a leader of a coalition. You can just be a member. You can be a consultant, right? They can just lean on you for your take whenever you have it, or you can be a volunteer. Volunteering can be like text banking, phone banking, stuff like that, right? You all know it. There's just a bunch of different ways to be involved with coalitions. There's not one way. Another way to engage with the legislative process, excuse me, is to attend hearings virtually or in person if safe, and provide testimony. I talked about this. This typically happens in the committee portion of the process, right? Oral testimony, virtual on Zoom, it's fun, or written testimony, submit a letter. Attend an advocacy day if it's safe. A lot of advocacy days are moving to virtual, but this is a great way. Advocacy days are amazing in connecting with your legislator, forming that direct contact, maintaining the contact, and letting them know what is important to you. And you can also participate in planned actions, right? So phone zaps or phone banking, right? So we see this a lot where, let's say a bill we oppose has made it to the Senate floor for a vote, and we get that, call your senator immediately and tell them to oppose this bill. Yes, do that. That's a phone zap. You can also do tweets. We love tweet storms, right? It's a great form of community education and mobilization. So yeah, I want to cover that. And then another form of a type of advocacy is developing tools. So develop and provide tools for your legislator, right? Again, y'all are the subject matter experts. Like, you would be so surprised at how little some legislators know about issues that they're voting on, like that come across them in their committee or come across them on the floor. So we gotta provide them with tools to better understand the issue, who we are, and how the issue impacts us. So do one-pagers or fact sheets, sign petitions, create a sign-on letter. Those are very popular. Write an op-ed, contribute to like academic journals or like local newsletters and articles, right? There's so many different ways that we can be creating like tangible tools and resources that we can share with our legislators to let them know, like, this is an issue that must be addressed. So I want to stop and close off with a couple examples of PWN advocacy in action. I know I went through a lot, so we will have questions at the end, but real quick, I'm hoping these examples will help illustrate advocacy in action. And so I really want to highlight our Virginia HIV Justice Coalition work. That is our amazing member, Deirdre Johnson, in there. I'm not sure, Deirdre, if you're on this, but that's our VA state lead. Earlier this year, ECHO VA, which is a coalition that Deirdre co-founded, identified and responded to a really bad HIV criminalization bill that was introduced in Virginia. This was in January of this year. Deirdre came up to Richmond, Virginia, and provided in-person testimony opposing this really bad bill. And then PWN supported Deirdre by submitting written testimony and provided a snapshot of that, opposing the bill as well. Because of our opposition and following the lead of ECHO VA, we were able to kill this really bad bill. And it drew a lot of attention from state partners like Equality Virginia. Our friend Cira helped us lead this whole initiative and is a huge partner. And we formed a larger coalition with them and have since we are about to introduce or pre-file a new community-led bill on HIV criminalization, right? It's entirely done by ECHO VA, CIRO, PWN, Equality Virginia, and many more directly impacted folks, right? So this is a great example of Deirdre identifying something bad, getting together, we formed a coalition, killed this bad bill, and instead did a community-led alternative that we are hoping becomes law this next session. And so our next example is our Texas Strike Force, and I would love to turn it over to Jessie Mona, who is a member of our Texas Strike Force team and a PWN lead in Texas. So Barb, if you could unmute Jessie Mona. Jessie Mona, could you share your experience on the Texas Strike Force? I can do it. Oh, 1 second, y'all.
Yeah. Jessie Mona, you should be promoted to a panelist now and able to go ahead and talk if you're off mute.
Can you hear me now, Barb?
Yes.
Yep, sure can.
Okay, thank you. My name is Jessie Mona, down here in Texas, pronouns she, her, and hers, co-chair for the Positive Women's Network, Greater Houston, Texas chapter. And so what we did, we went down to Austin last year. It was a community of HIV activists. It was a community activists and advocates. And we went down because every year we have something called Advocacy Day. And actually last year was very exciting for us because it was the first time that the HIV AIDS community had been recognized on the floor. Senator Boris Miles actually read a proclamation to honor the advocacy that we're doing in the field of HIV, and he made that day HIV Advocacy Day. And so what we got to do was to visit with politicians, discuss current bills that were being held in the 86th legislative session. We went to their offices, we spoke to their office workers if they weren't there, and some of us actually went to meet the politicians here in our own local community. And you can do that. Your voice is very important. When a bill comes up, you look at that bill and you try to understand the English language in it, and it can be very tricky. And so what we did for the 86th legislative session, strike force, we struck with force. When we would go down to Austin to speak in front of the public session committees that were held, we would lend our support or opposition to the bill, and you have to be very concise and very to the point to say why you're opposing it or why you support it. And we were very successful in many areas using our voice and collaborating together with other advocates and allies to help get bills that we didn't want to become law. And so you track your bills, the ones that mean something to you, you can read them. You can actually, like Brianna stated, you can write a letter, you can call them up, you can send an email. We did all of that and also spoke to these, our representatives in person at their offices or down there. And so the other thing that we did when we tracked the bills, we had action alert, and an action alert as that bill moved closer to becoming law and we didn't want it to become law. That's when we would mobilize, go down to the public comment session and speak, or reach out to them and send an email, some type of communication to let them know why we opposed it. We learned about talking points to get right to the point and be concise about what it was we want to say. I just want to let you guys know that for this 87th legislative session right now, bills are being filed right now as I speak. And there are over 30 something bills related to voting. We're looking at HIV bills, drug bills, LGBTQ, abortion, as well as voting. And it's a very exciting thing to do, and it's very educational, and it's very simple. So we support each other. We're a team of advocates that work together to effective change. And that basically is what we do. We were just really proud to be recognized by Senator Boris Miles for the work that we do in the HIV/AIDS community. And I'm very excited to be a part of the 87th legislative session. And we need all the help that we can get. Nothing about us without us, and there's strength in numbers. And I've seen the results of voices coming together all the way down to Washington, D.C. to affect a change, even in healthcare, which is very important to everyone. So Brianna, I was gonna stop right there. I hope that I addressed what you want me to talk about.
Yeah, you did. Thank you so much for sharing, your experience as an advocate and also your leadership. Again, like Jessie Mona said, the Texas Strike Force has done an amazing job in 2019, forming an HIV Advocacy Day, connecting with their legislators, and the structure that they set up in 2019 to track bills, to mobilize community and to message our issues is groundbreaking. And we're very excited to work with you all again for this next session. So thank you so much, Jessie Mona, for sharing all of that. So here are some resources. Again, I will send these out to you all. Open States is the Find Your Legislator. I also have a link to our policy agenda. PWN USA also has an advocacy guide for people living with HIV. So if you're like, Brianna, this was a lot of information in 45 minutes, I hear you, and I know it's definitely something that takes time to learn. We have a great tool that you all can refer to throughout your advocacy endeavors. And I also wanted to plug our partner, Ciro. They have a phenomenal project bill tracker. The Ciro project has a bill tracker on their website where you can go and see what bills at the state level Ciro is tracking. And these are all bills that impact people living with HIV. They're criminalization bills, they're COVID-19 bills, and more. So again, I'll share. And with that, let's take some questions. We have quite some time to take questions. So Barb, I don't know if you have any yet, but we're here to answer.
Yeah, so if people want to go ahead and raise your hands, we can go ahead and take you off of mute. But while we're waiting for people to think of their questions, Brianna, we had a question about language and language interpretation. Is that often a priority for staffers?
So just to make sure I understand the question, is language interpretation in a bill?
Yeah, so it's is interpretation and language equity, like bills written or testimony written in other languages, a priority for staffers?
That is a phenomenal question. I would hope it's a priority. I personally do not have experience with that, so I cannot make a general statement, but I would hope it is. I think if you're having issues with like language access, that is something that to flag for local advocate groups. But yeah, that's a great question. I'm so sorry I don't have a direct answer. I don't have experience in that.
And then we have a question from Anita. So Anita, I'm going to go ahead and promote you. And you can go ahead and come off the mute and ask your question if you'd like to.
Hi, my name is actually Deborah. I'm with Mi Familia Vota in Houston. I'm just signed into one of my coworkers' accounts. I'm not sure why that happened, but that was actually my question. A lot of our base is Spanish speaking, or at most bilingual, and so I was just curious when we are engaging our community or even encouraging people to give testimony or submit written testimony, if we could, how we should frame, messaging around submitting that testimony in Spanish, because we want our base to feel empowered to participate, even if they aren't, fluent or literate in English.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that flag. That is critically important and something that we will definitely take back with us at PWN. But yeah, we love to see like what work your organization does, or maybe others are, in setting a model and how we provide that access and support for folks that don't speak English or a different language. Thank you.
And next we have a question from Megan. Megan, I'm going to go ahead and promote you to a panelist, and you can go ahead and come off of mute if you'd like to ask your question.
Thank you. Hi, this is Adriana in Houston at AMA. How are you guys all?
Great.
Good. So I wanted to kind of give you guys some resources. I know Rice University provides a lot of support for agencies and individuals, especially in their media department. And one of the things that I found out was they can actually assist in doing like video, and they'll add the subtitle to where it changes for language. So you can reach out to your local university, wherever you're at. I'm sure there's a somebody within that or that university that would be willing to help.
Yeah, thanks. I would love if you could share that resources, like if you could drop it in our chat box or email it. My email's on the screen. I would love to review that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Currently, Brianna, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. So if anyone else would like to ask a question either in the chat box or raise your hand, we can go ahead and take you off of mute so you can go ahead and ask it. All right, looks like we've got a question from Crystal. And Crystal, sorry. Okay. And Crystal, you can just go ahead and come off mute and ask your question when you're ready.
Hi, I did want to ask a question, and I think you might have put this in one of your slides, Brianna. This is Crystal from Houston. I would love to hear more about how people are thinking about convening during their legislative session for either advocacy day or either to like engage with their legislators, especially during COVID. I would love to hear how people are thinking about that during this time.
Yeah, no, great question. That is honestly an ongoing conversation, right? Like I can say for Virginia, we are going to be an exclusively virtual session this year. First time ever, right? So I think there's a lot of learning. We know that access virtually has looked like, at least in Virginia, using platforms like Zoom, not exactly, but like it. But you know, there are real concerns with like access, equitable access, right? Because not all folks have access to computers. Not all folks have, you know, internet or stable internet, and like those type of things should not interfere with our ability to speak on behalf of our communities during the legislative sessions. So, you know, Virginia is tackling it one way, and it's not perfect. I know there are talks about virtual advocacy days happening at the state level in Texas and Florida. But how exactly those will happen are truly still being discussed. So it's definitely on the top of everyone's mind. I think we're just working through the logistics.
Great, thanks, Brianna. And then it looks like we have one question that came in from our question and answers. So I'll go ahead and read it, and then that'll probably be our last question, I think. So how do you know when is the right time for action on a bill? Frequently, bills sit in our General Assembly for months or years. Then we get emails saying, act now. And sometimes it's really the time, and other times not.
Yeah, I hear that. It's always, it's very tricky. Like, when do we act, when do we not? I think that question really depends on, you know, the circumstances, right? So I think I gave the example. So one example I have is like our Virginia bill, this that we killed this past year in January, and like what triggered us to like quickly respond to and act on this bill is that like it wasn't going anywhere. This bill has been introduced 3 years in a row, and it never made it out of a committee. However, this year, the legislature flipped in Virginia, and it seemed like this bill was going to make it through in this new body, right? And we were pinged that this bill is moving. Deirdre was pinged, who told PWN and Zero this bill is moving, and we mobilized in the matter of hours to kill this bill. And so when we say like when is the time right? you know, unfortunately, with the state legislative process, it's very rapid. There's only so much we can plan for. Bills that have sat in sessions for years can all of a sudden gain life overnight, and we have to very quickly mobilize our community. And sometimes bills are very predictable, and we're able to better plan when we mobilize community, and also better plan how we respond, right? And so I think I believe the best way to respond to either the rapid or the plan is to set up great structures with your folks, your community, so you're prepared for the event of a bill you support or a bill you oppose moving. I know these are not great answers. I'm giving a lot of, it depends, I don't know, but that really is the nature of state legislative sessions. You just have to be ready to respond in real time. Well, I do want to be respectful of folks' time. We are up at the hour. Do we have like one more question before we close out? Okay.
Doesn't look like it. We have some suggestions around community town halls in the chat box, but I think that is more of a comment than a question.
That's great. Can we have a readout of the community town hall?
Yes. So this was from, let's see, we have community town halls with our federal representatives consistently by phone here in Annapolis. We need to look and see if our representatives are holding community town halls monthly or when. Eleanor Norton Holmes from Washington, D.C. has phone town halls as well.
That's a great flag. Thank you so much for making that. Yes, that's another, I think, Crystal, that might get to your earlier question of like virtual engagement, is that, you know, we can call upon our state representatives and state senators to hold these virtual town halls. But yeah, thank you. All right. So thank you so much, y'all, for joining us today. I know it was a lot of information, and thank you so much for your questions. And thank you so much to Jesse, Mona, and other folks in the chat who were sharing their experiences. I want to reiterate that this is just this is the State Legislative Advocacy Training series. So this was just the first webinar, right? And it was a lot of information, but we have 3 more webinars coming up. Our next one is issue-based advocacy, led by Barb, and we will also go over some of the stuff that we talked about today. We also have a building support for your issue through effective messaging webinar that will be led by Jenny Smith-Cameo, comms director at PWN. And we will also have a community mobilization webinar led by our organizing department at PWN, like Ebony. So please keep these dates in mind. Don't worry, we'll be sending out invitations to everybody. But yes, please join us for the full series. And then also we have an evaluation form. Please, we beg, please fill out the evaluation form. We'll share it in the chat box, and we will also email it to every attendee. Please fill it out. We really want to craft these webinars to meet y'all's needs. And these evaluation charts forms help us. And with that, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and be the state legislative advocates I know you all are. I look forward to seeing your work.
Thank you, Brianna. That was good. That was really good.